Okay, we'll make a start as people begin to join us this afternoon. I'm delighted to be joined in the downtown den today by Bridget Phillipson. Bridget is the Member of Parliament for Houghton and Sunderland South, elected in 2010. And for the purposes of today, we'll focus mostly on her role in the shadow Treasury team. Bridget, delighted to see you today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for the invitation.
And before we get into the nuts and bolts of the economic brief, which clearly is hugely important and potentially even more important as we come out of what has been an awful 12 months, just give us a flavour of your career background to date, how you got involved in politics.
So I joined the Labour Party when I was 15. I grew up in the Northeast, where I'm speaking to you today. And being involved in the Labour Party was always just an important part of my life, about being part of the community, about the change that I wanted to see, both locally, nationally and internationally. I grew up going along to Labour Party meetings. My mum was a party member. She was also a single parent in the days before she was starting much childcare. So if she was to go to the meetings, then I had to come along as well and be there. But as I got older, you know, in my own right, I just became more and more convinced that the Labour Party had the right ideas for Britain. I joined the party in '98, so a point at which, you know, we were riding high. There was so much optimism about what Labour could achieve and did achieve, and how it transformed communities like mine. And, you know, when the opportunity came to stand, you know, to seek selection and to stand to be elected to Parliament, I really wanted to make a difference and serve my community, because, you know, it's a fantastic place, really wonderful people, you know, young people brimming with ideas and enthusiasm. And I just felt that, you know, we needed every opportunity to play our full part in the life of the country. And I don't feel that we do yet. And there's still a lot to do, but I'm sure we'll be picking up on some of those themes.
So indoctrinated from an early age, Bridget, it's fair to say. And listen, you say you joined the party in 1998, sorry. And interestingly, of course, we were in government then. The Labour Party was in government then, and for a long period of time, 13 years. But of course, since 2010, opposition. And, you know, a huge election defeat back in 2019. I just wonder where you see the party at this moment in time, and what lessons do you think need to be learned if Labour is to return to government anytime soon?
I think if you look to what happened in '97 and thereafter, there was a real sense in the country that the Conservative government had run out of ideas and the country was headed in the wrong direction. And that was very much what I felt. You know, the area in which I grew up, youth unemployment was very high, crime was high, you know, people were denied opportunities to get on in life. And for me, the Labour Party was about making sure that no matter where you're from, no matter, you know, your family composition or the community in which you grow up, you should have every opportunity in life. And I think that government from '97 onwards, the Labour government, did such tremendous work in making that a reality for so many people. Of course, there is still so much more to do. We've been out of power now for some time, and by the point of the next election, the country will have changed, and in many ways not for the better. But I've always believed that the Labour Party only wins when it has both a critique of where things are going wrong with the incumbent government, but also with a positive and hopeful vision about the future, a sense that we are a great country, but we could be better still. And I have no doubt that under Keir Starmer, Labour will be setting out that vision at the next general election that will bring that hope and optimism, and will seek to unite our country. You know, we've been very divided as a nation in recent years, and I think we need to find a way of, you know, wherever you happen to be, that Britain is the best place to grow up in and the best place to grow old in. So that means great schools, first-class public services, the right help there if you want to start your own business. I think these are all really important issues, whether you're in Sunderland or Swindon, and it's how we build that electoral coalition in order to win next time.
I've been reading over Easter Tony Blair, the journey, or his journey. And I've read the book before, of course, but just to sort of reflect and remind myself of those times. And perhaps more importantly, from sort of 79 through to probably 94, 95, there was a feeling within the country that the Labour Party had never govern again. It had almost become a one-party state. And so some people have been saying to me a couple of years back, particularly on the back of that historically bad defeat that Labour suffered, we'll never see a Labour government again. But as you'll know, Bridget, things in politics turn very quickly. If we'd have been having this conversation 6 months ago, Labour were ahead in the polls. So that's how quickly things can turn around. But what struck me about Blair's book, and I think, perhaps some in the party need to be reminded of this, if I may dare to say so, it's when you actually talk about common sense issues that people on a daily basis care about and think about. And I just felt that from a period of time, maybe from 15, 16, 17, Labour stopped doing that, got carried away with some single issue campaigns that are important in their own right, but didn't really have a vision to coalesce around. And perhaps that's where Keir Starmer needs to, or is, taking the party at the moment.
I think, if you look at what happened in 2019, it was a devastating defeat for us, but it was the fourth defeat on the bounce. So I think the problems do run pretty deep. And I think you're right to say that the values that we have to be communicated in a way that people think is in touch with their lives. And I think it's not just a question of values, it's also whether people believe that we're able to deliver on that, the practical reality of delivering in government, which is why, why competence is such an important thing. I think that our approach in 2024 will be very much rooted in people's priorities and the things that they see around them. I mean, just to give one example, I was out this morning visiting a constituent who's been having terrible problems with antisocial behaviour, with quad bikes, and there is no escaping the fact that, visibility from the police is not what it used to be, because the numbers have massively reduced. Funding for the police has been massively cut, and that's led to people just not feeling as safe as they should in their own home and in their own community. And I think that message around security will be a really important one for us, but also that we should seek to recapture some of the language I think we've ceded, that the party has ceded to the right in recent years, which is that, you have every right to feel safe, and it's working people that will often be on the receiving end when things go badly wrong within their communities. And going back to your point about Tony Blair, I don't think you can ever really top tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime is a means of explaining both having the right resources in place to deal with problems where they arise, but also preventing those problems happening in the first place and nipping them in the bud when they do. And that is also about prevention and not just responding to the problems that do arise. So I think that message is a hard one to top, and I think communicates very effectively the kind of priorities that Labour will continue to identify. But we do face a big challenge ahead. We lost badly, and it will take time to convince people that we're deserving of their trust once more. I think we've started on that journey, but it's a big mountain to climb, and it's going to take time.
Okay, tell us about the role that you've taken in the Treasury team then, Bridget, and then we'll go on to sort of get your analysis of where the economy is at this moment in time, and perhaps what differentiates Labour at this moment in time from the government.
So I work very closely with Annalisa Dodds, our Shadow Chancellor. I'm Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, so I'm the number 2 in the Shadow Treasury team, sitting in Keir Starmer's Shadow Cabinet. And it was a real privilege to be asked to take on that position just over a year ago now, and it's been quite a year, and a terrible year, frankly, for so many people, and it's been really tough and a really challenging time. So I work very closely with Annalisa on Labour's economic response, and on that front, obviously, it's been a really busy year in holding the government to account and pressing for the government to listen to businesses, to understand the challenges that they're facing, and to put in place the right kinds of solutions that keep people in jobs, keep businesses going, and deal with what has been, an incredibly challenging time for so many people across our country. but also looking to develop Labour's thinking on the economy going into the next general election. And it's not always easy because, frankly, if anyone were to make predictions around what would happen in the next 6 months or the next year, I think it would be slightly foolish. And we don't really know what the state of the public finances will be, in a year's time, never mind closer to 2024. But some of what we're starting to think about is not just the message that Labour will be putting forward in that election, but what's the kind of country that we want to build right through into the 2030s. So, for all I was talking there about the great things that Labour did in government, that's some time ago now, and the world has moved on, and the solutions and policy ideas that work then won't be the same ones now. I mean, the last time Labour won an election back in 2005, Facebook was only just coming into existence. Social media wasn't really a thing in any great way. Most people consumed their media just through television channels and the print papers. A lot has changed. I mean, this was an era before, before so many, before same-sex marriage, before Brexit, before so much that's changed and shaped our world. So that fresh thinking about what will work right through into the 2030s, but obviously informed by the very difficult position that we will find ourselves in as a country and an economy, and how, as we start to recover, we do so in a way that benefits, that sees every part of our country have the opportunity to be a part of that sees no family and no community left behind. And I think for me that's the very real risk already, that the pandemic will entrench many of those inequalities that were already there before, and I think have been so ruthlessly and brutally exposed during the course of the pandemic.
And I think perhaps this may define where the real dividing lines at the next election are. I mean, I'm not sure yet what the Chancellor's approach is going to be in his budget in the autumn, in terms of whether or not he will come up with additional investment plans that he's not yet made public, because of course he wouldn't have necessarily wanted to fire all his bullets in his last statement. But if you look across the pond and look to what Joe Biden's done, an incredible investment package there of $1.9 trillion, with the promise of more to come. And then if you listen to Biden, he's saying that part of the reasoning is that he learnt lessons from the 2008 crash, when he actually thought that they were too cautious. They weren't ambitious enough. And as a result, although the US economy did, of course, bounce back, he felt that it was too slow. And perhaps that's why Donald Trump gained the presidency when he did, 8 years after the Obama administration finished. I just wonder where you stand on this, Bridget, because, more so than the Conservatives, Labour do have to maintain a reputation of being financially prudent, because for many years the accusation has been levelled at Labour, well, you just spend money for the sake of spending money. But as I say, if you look at what Biden and the Democrats are doing in the States, they're investing their way to growth. And I just wonder what side of the fence Labour will be looking to take, because Sunak is already talking about paying the money back. For me, if the economy crashes, then paying the money back is not necessarily going to be the priority if you're one of the 3-4 million people potentially who are on the dole.
I mean, I think firstly, just to talk a bit about the government's response, which does then take us to what's happening in the US. And I think the shift that we're seeing internationally on the approach that needs to be taken as we start to rebuild out of the crisis. So firstly, the Chancellor has called this wrong at so many different points, but, firstly, we were kind of slow to take the necessary measures to lock down, not least when we should have had that circuit breaker, I believe, in September, October, and we didn't. And that's come with real economic damage. I know the Chancellor in recent days has said, talked about the balance, but, the damage has been more significant because of that slowness to put in place the public health measures. I mean, and there are also big, wider questions around the effectiveness of some of the support that the government has put in place. So many people have been excluded from support altogether. It's been a lot of chopping and changing, which I know has been really difficult for a lot of the businesses that I've spoken to plan in any real way taking staff on in advance of Christmas only to be told that those staff can't be furloughed, and that date still hasn't changed, and the lack of training support that's run alongside that, and the government's job support schemes, which won't kick in for some people until they've been out of work for over a year, which is just completely the wrong approach to be taking. I think in terms of how that connects to the US, I mean, firstly, that US stimulus spend does include a lot of spending that's already happened in the UK, for example, around vaccines. So it's not necessarily comparable in the same way. And I think the situation is a bit different in that there doesn't appear to be a limit on the market appetite for US government debt. And it's not clear that that's necessarily the same here in the UK, which is why QE, quantitative easing, has been important as part of the response as well. I think that said, the government should be bringing forward capital spending to kickstart job creation and business support, and also look to green our economy. We face a big challenge around climate change, but with that challenge, I think comes real opportunity to create good, well-paid jobs, particularly in parts of the country that most need to see that private sector investment and job creation. So it's both a terrible challenge for our world, but also I think a real opportunity to create good, clean jobs for people. And that's something that Annalisa Dodds and Ed Miliband have been talking a lot about around the green recovery. I think it's not, however, just a question about stimulating demand, although that is important. And actually the government are pulling demand out of the economy at a really crucial point, whether you're talking about council tax increases, a freeze and pay cut for many workers. That will suck demand out of high streets and businesses at a really fragile point. But I think we also have a real vulnerability where it comes to a lack of resilience within family finances. Going into this crisis, so many families didn't have any money saved up because it just wasn't possible for them to do so. And as a country, over the course of this last decade, we haven't got to grips with the real challenges that we face around productivity. And that will also, I think, be central to the kind of recovery that we will need to see, that involves, I think, a shift in how things are done. But if we are to see change post-pandemic in terms of people's commuting patterns or whether they are able to work from home some of the time, although I appreciate that won't apply to everybody, how we make sure that any benefits that come from that are shared by both employers and employees alike, that we see kind of benefits for everyone. So I think lots of challenges, but also that shift, I think, that there has been around the international consensus on this is welcome. And I think it will allow Labour to make the case for why we need to see support to get our economy going once more.
And the other conundrum that all governments have now, doesn't matter what colour they are, is how you raise the finances to support, let's face it, in many respects, even greater requirements in terms of the infrastructure that we expect these days as citizens, don't we, in places like the UK. And again, we all know how difficult it is to raise taxes, to simply say, well, we're going to put income tax up. But we have to find the money somewhere, Bridget. And I wonder if any thought is being given to how that might happen in the 21st century. Will there be different ways in which we can actually start to fund our public services?
As I said earlier, I think it would be unwise to really make any kind of predictions around what the shape of the public finances will be in such a volatile period. And we will set out in a lot more detail closer to the next election, once that situation is more clear, what our position will be around taxation and spending. I think what I said about the international consensus shifting is an important one, I think, both for Labour and for the country, which is that there is a recognition now, I think, that post-2010, the sucking of demand out of the economy, the move to consolidate too quickly, and then which led to some reversal by George Osborne, made our recovery, more difficult than it should have been. And if you look at the predictions from the Office of Budget Responsibility around growth in the years ahead, once we've started to emerge from the worst phase of the pandemic, growth is looking very, very anemic, which speaks to some of the deeper structural problems that existed within our economy going into this crisis. One, the principal one, I think, being around productivity and how we kind of make improvements there. I think we will also need to see greater international action around digital and tech, and it has been encouraging to see Janet Yellen and President Biden saying more around this, because we don't have anywhere near a level playing field for our bricks and mortar businesses versus online and digital. Yet, we've seen during this crisis just how important people's high streets are to them. And whilst I think we all recognise that the shape of our high streets has changed and will change over the years ahead, and there might be a shift in some of the services with a move perhaps towards more service-based rather than retail in some ways, I think people really value that. And I pick up a lot of frustration from local traders about, they pay what's asked of them, they do what's required, and yet others are in a position to move their tax liabilities around across the world, and we don't have that anywhere near a level playing field. And I think that has to be a priority for the government, and I hope that they will show some international leadership and work with the US and others to try and get to a global recognition around what needs to happen, because what the government has brought forward here so far in the digital services tax only captures a fraction of the activity that is necessary, and doesn't really do anything to address the fact that many of those big firms aren't paying the levels of corporation tax that we might expect.
I did wonder actually whether during his last statement, Rishi Sunak may have ventured the idea of a success tax for those companies that have done remarkably well through the crisis. And, good luck to them in one sense, but nonetheless, the profit margins of an Amazon, for example, compared to many, many businesses across the UK, pale into insignificance. So you would think that there might be something smart that we could do there, but let's see. I can say that because Amazon aren't a member of Downtown and Business, so declare a non-interest there, I suppose. Listen, let me just ask you about our hospitality sector and visitor economy, which are hugely important, of course, in terms of contributing to UK PLC. What's your view on this idea of COVID passports? I think I'm reading that there's opposition from all sides of the House on this. I just wondered whether or not you saw any pragmatism moving forward that may actually change your mind as far as that's concerned, or are you just thinking it's a step too far in terms of impact on civil liberties?
I mean, just first of all, I know it's been a really tough year for the hospitality sector, and I'm sure that many of them are delighted to be able to reopen at least outdoors for those that can pretty soon. And it's such an important part of our economy and all of our local high streets and local communities. So and it is safer to be for that activity to take place outdoors. And I'm glad the government's talking more about the kind of safety aspect of that outdoors. I mean, you're right, we don't support vaccine passports. It's not clear to us so far what the benefits are compared to the risks and the costs. We think it just risks being discriminatory, but also coming potentially at a huge cost to the taxpayer. And the government haven't had a great track record in all of this. I mean, there's been myriad problems with contracting during the pandemic, and we've seen billions spent on face masks that didn't work, on PPE that never arrived. We think the government's focus should be on making sure that self-isolation happens, that we still haven't fixed self-isolation support a year into this. So many people aren't eligible for statutory sick pay or aren't eligible for the self-isolation payment, and the government should urgently look to fix that. And if we get the vaccine rollout working and continue to work effectively, then having that will be the most important thing, alongside self-isolation, and also just better contact tracing. Where it's been delivered by local councils, it's worked really well, but there have been major shortcomings in the national contract. So it's not entirely clear to me what it is the government are suggesting that this would be for. There's been a lot of confusion around what the government are putting forward and why. So we would want to look at all of the detail on that. But I think there are just big questions around the value of it, whether it will be entirely necessary, or whether the focus of the government, I think, should probably be in the short and medium term, be much more around fixing self-isolation, getting contact tracing working absolutely properly wherever you are in the country, and continuing with the vaccine rollout. Because if all of that works more effectively, then we'll come out of this pandemic more quickly.
The other industry sector, of course, linked to the visitor economy, but going the other way, I suppose, the aviation industry, which has had an awful 12 months. And again, people are, some people, desperate to get onto foreign holidays. Any thoughts about, the utilisation of vaccine passports, test and trace in that regard? I saw a statistic yesterday suggesting that it may cost up to £1,000 for £1,000 more for a family holiday for a family of four to go abroad. Now that's pricing an awful lot of people out of foreign travel, isn't it? So again, any thoughts around that, Bridget?
I mean, I think there is a slightly separate argument around both testing and kind of proof of vaccination where it comes to international travel. That said, I mean, I'm still really concerned that the government hasn't put in place effective quarantining for people arriving into the country at a point where, the vaccine rollout is going well, but we need to make sure it continues at pace and we don't see people bringing new variants of COVID into the country at a point at which we're just starting to get on top of things. So I think that is a real gap in the government's response, and they still need to put that right. I mean, I do completely understand that, after what has been a really tough year for a lot of people, they want a break and they would love to have an annual family holiday. I mean, I know it's hard, but I think people perhaps, I think we just need to try and get through this phase of things and try and come out the other side. I think there are big questions around the government's response on the aviation sector. I mean, we were promised an aviation sector deal a year ago, and that's never materialised. And it's not clear to me why that has happened, why that's come to nothing, because it's also an opportunity, I think, to look at how we kind of support the wider sector, both in terms of manufacturing, but right through that supply chain, and into all of the support services and operations that are geared around it. And we haven't had that from the government. And that kind of goes to the wider point, I think, around the lack of effective targeting of the government's response. There just hasn't been a recognition, I think, from the start that some parts of our economy are going to be hit harder and for longer. And, I've spoken to coach companies as well, which cover both domestic and international tourism. So, you would have visitors arriving often from, say, China and the US, into the UK, and coach companies and operators, even from places like the Northeast, benefit from people arriving into Heathrow, and they take people on tours around the country. I mean, they were hit, last January, visitors stopped arriving because of the arrival of COVID in China and elsewhere. And then they don't anticipate really being up and running again until next year. So that's really 2 whole years. And yet the government doesn't really have much to say to those businesses. Many of them are absolutely drowning under debt. And we don't think they should be having to consider paying that back until they're in a much stronger position and until they're starting to make money again. So making it income contingent, just in order to get them through it. Because you're talking about family businesses that have been going for decades. And it just seems incredibly short-sighted to let really good family businesses like that, but massively burdened and kind of teetering on the edge, when the vaccine does mean that it's been slow, but of course things will start to return and people will be able to travel again. So I think the issue around both aviation and the wider tourism sector is partly an issue of targeting and just a need to understand the different challenges facing different parts of our economy.
When you mention controlling viruses coming in from abroad, it's that time that you wish we lived on an island, don't you? Make it a bit simpler for us. But anyway, that's another argument. Listen, Bridget, I want to move on from the economic brief, although the economy obviously impacts on everything. And I just wanted to get your take on where the Northern Powerhouse project is, because, George Osborne very much in the front of that particular policy initiative, gave Greater Manchester the initial devolution deal, big advocate of regional mayors. And West Yorkshire actually about to get a regional mayor in May as well. So not that it's stopped in terms of a process, but certainly I don't get the feeling that there's the appetite, the enthusiasm for those devolved powers that perhaps we had when George Osborne was leading the Northern Powerhouse initiative. And of course, the Northeast very much a part of that project if it's to work. So what's Labour's view on that? Do you share with me a bit of a frustration that we appear to have run out of a bit of steam as far as that's concerned?
Yes, and we've ended up with a very patchwork approach to devolution. So we've ended up with very different arrangements in different parts of the country. Frankly, it feels for no discernible reason. So in my part of the world, in the northeast, we didn't end up in a position of having a northeast-wide settlement, and we have kind of different levels of authority in different ways. I mean, I think there is time to kind of address some of that. But at the same time, I mean, my concern is that all too often the government has devolved the blame for some of this, but not devolved the powers and money that runs alongside it. So local politicians can end up taking the flak for what are effectively central government decisions. I mean, on the wider question around what devolution looks like right across the UK, Gordon Brown is leading a commission for Labour at the moment looking at all of this. So they've started work and will be considering these wider questions, which also apply to the settlement in Scotland, as well as the settlement within England as well. I think what we've seen more recently with the talk of levelling up has been pretty hollow, and it just feels like it's an empty slogan a lot of the time. You know, I've yet to see a proper definition of what is meant by levelling up, not least when so much of what's happened over the course of the last decade has seen disadvantaged entrenched in so many communities that are now apparently to benefit from government schemes. And I think, you know, there is a real sense where it comes to the way in which government decision making is made around, say, the Towns Fund and the Levelling Up Fund, that it isn't even a case of, you know, vote Tory to get money for your town. It's a question of, you know, vote Tory and see money for your area diverted into richer areas of the country, which for me seems to not be quite what levelling up was meant to be about, if that were ever clear in the first place. And, you know, I look at what's happened over the course of the last decade, which is child poverty rising, violent crime going up, the number of police on our streets down, and the real hardship that many families are facing. And I just think we deserve a lot better than that. And, you know, ministers divvying up pots of money from Whitehall on a rather opaque basis, it is not the way to empower people to have real choice and control in their own lives. And it is no way in which to see businesses flourish, and to make sure that we address all of the imbalances around skills too. I mean, we talk a lot about infrastructure when we talk about levelling up, and that is of course really important. And I don't think the North East has, and the wider North has always had its fair share in the last 10 years of infrastructure investment. But even if that were to happen, unless we have a real push on skills running alongside it, we're not going to get the best possible outcomes from it. And I think we've had a real blind spot as a country over the course of the last decade on skills. You know, further education's been hollowed out. And if you were someone that wanted to have a second chance to go back and to get new skills and to retrain and to go back to education, it's just a lot tougher than it used to be. And it shouldn't be that way, because, you know, if we want people to, you know, start their own business, you know, get better opportunities for their families and make, you know, that kind of change, we need to make it as easy as possible. And in fact, it's got harder. And I think that's really damaged our regional economies in particular.
Okay. We've definitely got to improve the infrastructure up to the northeast, because Downtown and Business plans on establishing a branch up there in the not too distant future. So, you know, it is nonsense, isn't it, that we in Liverpool can get to London much quicker than we can get to Newcastle. It's just crackers, you know. But anyway, listen, that's something I'll take that up with you when I see you. Listen, I'm just going to say to people, if you want to put some questions in the chat room, please do so. I can only select some of them. We've already got quite a busy selection of questions in already. But last question from me for now, Bridget, and it's on this issue that dominated the political chat for far too long, really, several years. Like me, you were a Remainer, and of course, Brexit, as I say, dominated the political debate, probably dominated the last election to an extent. Noticed a poll recently suggesting that many in the Labour Party still believe that we should be campaigning to go back into the European Union. What's your view of Brexit now? Do you think that's an issue that we've decided upon, we have to move on, or is it something that we should be revisiting and taking another look at?
I mean, whatever views we all held, back then in 2016, I think those divides of Leave and Remain are behind us, and we've left the EU now. I mean, the referendum was almost 5 years ago, which feels extraordinary. I mean, time has taken on a different meaning, but we've left now. I think the big challenge for us is to make a success of it. It's happened. We need to make it work. I think there are big issues that the government will have to resolve in terms of its own deal and in making that deal work for business, because I want us to thrive as an outward-looking trading nation that works closely with our European partners, with the US and with others. I mean, that is absolutely essential, not least for many of our key kind of export industries. And those export industries are especially important to many of our regional economies too. Here in the Northeast, it's absolutely crucial to so many jobs and livelihoods. But I think we just have to try and, as a country, leave those divisions of 2016 behind us, look to focus on the future and build a better, more hopeful Britain for business, for our young people, and for families right across our country.
And, again, I have to confess, when I'm confronted by some people who voted the other way to me, the EU have made the right mess of the vaccination programme, haven't they? 27 countries trying to collectively roll out that sort of very complex and complicated programme has been a real challenge to them. And so, I think there's bigger questions and challenges along the way in terms of trade, which will come to light over the next 12 months. But at this moment in time, as a signed up Europhile, I'm certainly on the back foot. I won't necessarily ask you to comment on that, Bridget. We'll go to the questions in the chat room if you like.
I mean, that's fine. I mean, I don't think the language that's come out of some parts of the European Commission has really helped anybody, because it's in all of our interests that the vaccine rollout succeeds both in the UK, right across Europe, and indeed right across the world, because we're none of us, we're not going to be safe until everyone is safe. And I think that also means that as a country, given our vaccine rollout is going well, thanks to all of the tremendous efforts of NHS staff and volunteers, that when we've done all of that work here, that we make sure that it happens in other parts of the world that don't have the same access to vaccines. Because if we don't secure that effective programme right across the world, then we'll keep encountering these difficulties. So I think it's just incumbent on European politicians and British politicians just to make the vaccine rollout work effectively and get through this time.
Okay. Thanks, Bridget. Right, we'll turn to a couple of questions. David Wade-Smith, who's our chairman here in Liverpool, is put down an essay of a question, so I'll just pick out the highlights. And I think basically the nub of the point he's making is that, we've been through, the banking crisis, recession, austerity, 5 major national elections. Gosh, he's right there, isn't he? Brexit and COVID. And he's basically saying, when can we look forward to some optimistic vision for the future? Because doom and gloom does appear to have been around the UK for some considerable time now.
I mean, he's quite right. I mean, it's been a really challenging time, the last year, of course, but he's right, beyond that, going back to what we were saying there about the divisions of Brexit, the way in which it, of course, at a political level, at a national level, caused major political turbulence, but also within our communities. I think it caused debate and disharmony within families. And I think we all want to get to a place where we can look ahead to the future. I think that's why, and look to a future with optimism. I think that's why it's so important that the recovery that we see is one that benefits every part of our country, that sees no town or community left behind, because so much of the last decade, I think, has seen the erosion of many of the things that people have really regard as important and have come to expect within their lives. The change within communities, that people feel less safe. And I've always believed that we can do better as a country. And I suppose, and the challenge for Labour going into the next election is for us to communicate very clearly where the government has got things wrong, but also how we believe Britain can be better still. Because I'm proud of so much of what we've achieved as a country in the past, but I also think our best days are ahead of us and not behind us, but we need to make that a reality.
Thanks, Bridget. Question from Frank Rogers, who is a solicitor, so has something in common with the Leader of the Opposition, although I think Keir's a bit better qualified than Frank Rogers. I'm sure he won't mind me saying that. So as Leader, what has changed for Labour in terms of its identify, strategic appeal to voters? And basically, again, I'll cut this question short. Other than not being Jeremy Corbyn, what does Keir Starmer, do you think, offer that's alternative to that period of Labour's time?
I think I do have to go back to that terrible defeat of 2019. And for me, it's clear that the Labour Party had got a lot of things badly wrong. And I think in Keir Starmer, we have someone who has decency, integrity, has a lifetime of public service, both as the lead, as Director of Public Prosecution, so the most senior prosecutor in our country, who's done so much for victims of crime, not least around, on issues around violence against women, something that I think has quite rightly had much more attention in recent weeks, and it's something we need to make big progress on as a country. But a lot of the last year for the party has been just seeking once more to earn a hearing from the voters, because the scale of the defeat that we suffered in 2019, I think, demonstrated very clearly that voters didn't feel we were in step with their concerns or their priorities. And I know from all of the really difficult conversations that I had on the doorstep during that election, just how far people felt that we drifted away from what mattered to them. And they were understandably, very, very concerned about the nature of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, something which Keir Starmer has made an absolute priority to tackle. And I think we've made real progress on that too. So I think people are giving us a hearing, and that's, really important. But I just know how much more that we do have to do in order to earn back voters' trust, because the emotion that many people felt that I spoke to in 2019, they were heartbroken not to be voting Labour, having voted Labour all of their lives. And that's, it's a big job of work for us to win back that trust, but to connect with voters across the country who've perhaps never voted Labour. We've got a generation of voters now in their 30s bringing up their children who will have never voted Labour. And I think that's a huge problem for us. And we cannot understate that. But I think with Keir, you have someone who, is both in touch with the values of the British people, and is someone that you look at and you could very clearly imagine someone who could serve as Prime Minister. And I think that is the most important thing right now. But we'll clearly have to expand on that further in the years ahead.
Bridget, just a final question from me. It's been a challenging year for all of us, of course. And one of the bizarre things is watching Prime Minister's questions in a half-empty chamber and then thinking about the very detailed, complex issues that you're trying to deal with as parliamentarians in this virtual world, which must be hugely difficult. I can't even imagine what that is like. Are there any sort of timescales to when Parliament will return and when the executive can be held to account in a more traditional way? Because again, it may not feel like this to you, but certainly from the outside looking in, it doesn't appear to me that we're able to get under the skin of some of this decision making that's taken place. And that's not necessarily a criticism of the government. I understand and appreciate why we're having to operate the way we can, but I don't think it lends itself to good scrutiny and therefore good governance. So any timescales, and just on a personal level, how have you found it?
I mean, we'll be guided by the Speaker and Public Health England on some of that. And our staff have not been able to work from Parliament either, which, like every employer has brought with it challenges in how we support the people that work with us and how we make sure they're managing and how we can work as a team remotely. I mean, I have not had it as hard as many people. I wouldn't for one moment suggest that I have. I mean, politics, however, is very much about human interaction, about conversations, about talking, about, as you say, that challenge within the chamber that only comes from that physical presence. And the parliamentary authorities have done tremendous work in very quickly rolling out a digital platform to allow for contributions, which is better than it not happening at all. But I mean, it's not the same. I mean, I've been in the chamber a little bit to speak from the front bench, and it is strange to be speaking in such an empty chamber, and it kind of obviously just lacks a bit of that back and forth, where if you've got a minister who's having a hard time, where they're pressed by people that are physically present, it just underlines, I think, sometimes where there's a gap in an argument that's being made, or where there's a clear weakness in what's being said, and that is missing. I mean, necessary though it is, scrutiny has been a bit more difficult. I think one positive that I think I can take from the pandemic is some of the ways in which we have shifted how we work. I'll keep doing, and I think do have real benefits. So I've always done regular face-to-face coffee mornings for constituents. We do them throughout the constituency in different locations on a regular basis. We've had to move them online, obviously, but I think I will keep some of those online, because it's meant that people who might not be able to physically come along, in person, have been able to take part. So, I've had grandparents looking after their children, looking after grandchildren who've been able to participate. Shift workers just finding it easier just to, get online for half an hour. I probably wouldn't have done it before, because I would have been worried about excluding people who might not have access to technology. I mean, I'd never used Zoom before this had started, and I'd like to think that I, know how to get my way around a computer. But I think because so many people now have shifted to using some of these online platforms, it can make it easier, I think, for MPs to do events like midweek. When I would otherwise be in London and can't be in the constituency, I can do events online during the week and keep in touch with people. So I think I will keep a lot of that, and I think it's been a really welcome advance. But I have to say, I am really looking forward to being able to chat to people a bit more and see people face to face, because what a really important part about trying to be a good constituency MP and be effective in what you do is being out there, speaking to people, knocking on doors, visiting businesses, being within schools and seeing what's going on. And I have really missed that, and I do look forward to it all. We're getting back to some semblance of normality.
And Bridget, we look forward to getting you to a live downtown event, hopefully at some stage in the not too distant future as well. It's been great though to have you virtually in the downtown den, and thanks very much for your time. And we'll see you again, hopefully very soon.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks, Bridget, and thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks for your questions. Sorry I wasn't able to get to all of them, but that's Bridget Phillipson, Shadow Minister at the Treasury, potential future leader, I will predict, of the Labour Party, but who knows? Time will tell. Great to see you today, and stay in touch with Downtown in Business through the usual channels. Lots more events coming up, including our live programme, which you can now see on the website, all the W's, downtowninbusiness.com. Thanks for joining us. See you again soon. If you enjoyed that video, then please subscribe to our YouTube channel on the link below, and be among the first to get to listen to all the latest interviews through the Downtown Den.